Sergeant Thomas Whitmore had been a royal guard at Hampton Court Palace for 3 years, but he had never experienced anything like what happened on that foggy October morning. The palace, with its centuries of history and countless secrets, was about to reveal one of its most puzzling mysteries through the careful observations of a dedicated guard. Thomas began his shift at 6 in the morning, just as the autumn mist was lifting from the Thames. Hampton Court Palace had served as a royal residence since the 1500s, and every stone seemed to hold stories of kings, queens, and courtiers who had walked these halls centuries before. As a history graduate from Cambridge University, Thomas found his job endlessly fascinating, though most visitors only saw him as a silent figure in a traditional uniform. The palace had been experiencing some unusual incidents lately. Tour guides had reported strange sounds coming from the East Wing. During closing hours, security cameras had captured unexplained shadows moving through corridors that should have been empty. Most concerning of all, several valuable artifacts had been found moved from their usual positions, with no explanation of how or why. Thomas was stationed in the clock court that morning, one of the palace's most historic areas. Clock, installed by Henry VIII in 1540, dominated the gateway, its intricate mechanisms still keeping time after nearly 500 years. As Thomas stood at his post, he couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship of the Tudor architects who had created this masterpiece. Around 9:30, as the first groups of tourists began arriving, Thomas noticed something odd. A section of the cobblestone courtyard near the clock tower seemed to be settling differently than the rest. The stones appeared slightly lower, creating a subtle depression that hadn't been there the day before. His trained eye, developed through years of military service before joining the Royal Guard, immediately flagged this as something worth investigating. Thomas made a mental note to report the cobblestone issue to the maintenance department after his shift. Hampton Court was a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and any changes to the historic fabric of the building needed to be documented and addressed properly. But as the morning progressed, he noticed that the depression seemed to be getting slightly larger during his lunch break. Thomas walked around the affected area more carefully. The cobblestones were definitely sinking, and when he knelt down to examine them more closely, he could feel a slight draft of air coming up between the stones. This was very unusual. The courtyard had been paved for centuries, and there should be solid ground beneath the cobblestones. Thomas immediately reported his findings to his supervisor, Captain Elizabeth Morrison. Captain Morrison had been with the Royal Guards for 15 years and had a reputation for taking any unusual observations seriously. She accompanied Thomas back to the clock court and confirmed his assessment. "You're right, Sergeant," she said. After examining the area, "This definitely needs to be investigated. I'm going to contact the palace curator and the Historic Royal Palace's maintenance team." Dr. Margaret Ashford, the senior curator of Hampton Court Palace, arrived within an hour. She was a small, energetic woman in her 60s who had spent her entire career studying the palace's history and architecture. When Thomas showed her the settling cobblestones, her eyes lit up with excitement. "This is very interesting," Dr. Ashford murmured, kneeling down to feel the draft that Thomas had discovered. There have been rumors for centuries about hidden chambers and secret passages beneath Hampton Court, but most of them were dismissed as legends. She pulled out her phone and called the head of the archaeological department at the University of London. Within 2 hours, a team of specialists arrived with ground-penetrating radar equipment and other sophisticated tools for examining what lay beneath the courtyard. The initial scans revealed what appeared to be a substantial void approximately 6 feet below the cobblestones. The chamber seemed to be rectangular in shape, roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, with what looked like stone walls on all sides. Even more intriguingly, the radar suggested that there might be objects of various sizes within the chamber, as word spread through the palace staff about the discovery. Thomas found himself at the center of attention. Palace administrators, historians, and archaeologists all wanted to hear his account of how he had first noticed the settling stones. His careful observation and attention to detail had potentially led to one of the most significant archaeological discoveries at Hampton Court. In decades, Dr. Ashford pulled Thomas aside as the investigation team prepared to begin more detailed scans. Sergeant Whitmore, I want you to know that your observation skills may have uncovered something truly remarkable. Hampton Court has been continuously occupied and studied for 500 years, yet you've noticed something that everyone else missed. Thomas felt a sense of pride in his work, but also a growing curiosity about what lay hidden beneath the ancient courtyard. The palace was about to reveal one of its secrets, and he would be there to witness history being uncovered. The next morning brought an entire archaeological team to Hampton Court Palace. Dr. James Hartwell, Britain's leading expert on Tudor architecture, had driven down from Oxford overnight when he heard about the discovery. The clock court was cordoned off from tourists as sophisticated excavation equipment was carefully positioned around the settling cobblestones. Thomas was assigned to work closely with the archaeological team, providing security and ensuring that the investigation proceeded without disturbing the palace's daily operations. His military background and attention to detail made him invaluable as the team began the delicate process of removing the cobblestones. We need to proceed extremely carefully, Dr. Hartwell explained to the assembled team. This chamber has been sealed for centuries. Whatever is inside could be incredibly fragile. We also need to be mindful that we're working in one of Britain's most important historic sites. As the first layer of cobblestones was carefully lifted away, the team discovered that they were sitting on a foundation of much older stones. Beneath those, they found evidence of Tudor-era mortar and masonry. The discovery suggested that the chamber had been deliberately sealed, possibly during the reign of Henry VIII or one of his immediate successors. Thomas watched in fascination as the archaeologists worked with brushes and small tools, documenting every detail of what they uncovered. By midday, they had exposed what appeared to be a stone slab covering the mysterious chamber. The slab bore carved symbols that Dr. Ashford recognized as Tudor royal emblems. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, photographing the carved symbols. From every angle, these markings suggest that whatever is down there was sealed by royal order. The question is why, and what were they trying to hide or protect? The team decided to use a fiber optic camera to peer into the chamber before opening it completely. They drilled a small hole through the stone slab and inserted the tiny camera, connected to a monitor that would show them what lay beneath. When the camera feed appeared on the monitor, everyone gathered around in stunned silence. The chamber appeared to be filled with wooden chests, rolled documents, and what looked like ceremonial objects wrapped in deteriorated cloth. Even more intriguingly, they could see what appeared to be paintings or portraits stacked against one wall. Dr. Hartwell was the first to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're looking at a Tudor treasure room or archive that was sealed and forgotten for over 400 years. Thomas felt his heart racing as he stared at the monitor. His careful observation of settling cobblestones had led to what might be one of the most significant historical discoveries in Britain in decades. The chamber appeared to contain artifacts that could provide new insights into one of the most fascinating periods in English history. The team spent the rest of the day planning how to safely open the chamber and preserve whatever they found. Inside, environmental specialists arrived to test the air quality and humidity levels. Conservation experts came to advise on how to handle artifacts that had been sealed away for centuries. As evening approached, Dr. Ashford approached Thomas with a proposal. "Sergeant Whitmore, given that you made the initial discovery, we'd like you to be present when we open the chamber tomorrow. Your observations have been so valuable to this investigation that we want you to continue to be involved." Thomas was honored by the invitation, but he was also beginning to piece together some historical clues that might explain what they had found. During his break, he had been researching the history of the clock court and had discovered some intriguing connections. "Dr. Ashford," Thomas said, "I've been thinking about the timing of when this chamber might have been sealed. The clock court was completed in 1540, right at the height of Henry VIII's break with Rome and the dissolution of the monasteries. Dr. Ashford's eyes widened with understanding. "You think this might be connected to the religious upheaval of the 1530s and 1540s? "It's possible," Thomas continued. "Henry was seizing religious artifacts and treasures from monasteries all over England. Maybe some of the most valuable or controversial items were brought here and sealed away for safekeeping. Dr. Hartwell, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the royal seals on the chamber covering. If Henry or his advisors wanted to hide something from political or religious enemies, this would be the perfect place to do it. As the archaeological team prepared to leave for the evening, Thomas volunteered to remain on overnight security duty for the excavation site. He felt a personal responsibility for protecting the discovery he had made, and he wanted to be there when the chamber was finally opened. That night, as Thomas stood guard over the partially excavated site, he couldn't help but wonder what stories the hidden chamber would tell about one of the most turbulent periods in English history. At dawn on the third day, the archaeological team gathered around the excavation site with a sense of anticipation that was almost electric. The stone slab covering the hidden chamber was about to be carefully lifted away, revealing secrets that had been buried for over 4 centuries. Thomas stood alongside Dr. Ashford and Dr. Hartwell. As a specially designed lifting device was positioned over the carved stone slab, the process needed to be done slowly and carefully to avoid damaging whatever lay beneath. As the slab was gradually raised, the first glimpse of the chamber's contents took everyone's breath away. The chamber was remarkably well preserved. The dry conditions and sealed environment had protected the contents from decay and deterioration that would normally have destroyed organic materials over such a long period. The wooden chests that they had seen on the camera feed were still intact, their iron bindings dark with age but structurally sound. Dr. Sarah Collins, the team's conservation specialist, was the first to descend into the chamber using a specially constructed ladder. She wore gloves and a protective mask as she began the delicate process of documenting everything exactly as it had been found. There are 6 wooden chests of varying sizes, she reported to the team above. Multiple rolled documents that appear to be parchment or vellum. And there are definitely paintings or portraits, though I can't see them clearly in this light. As Dr. Collins worked to document the chamber's contents, Thomas noticed something that the others had missed. Along one wall of the chamber, partially hidden behind the largest wooden chest, there appeared to be carved inscriptions in the stone itself. Dr. Ashford Thomas called down to the chamber, "Can you see if there's writing carved into the wall?" Behind that large chest, Dr. Collins carefully moved closer to examine the wall Thomas had indicated. After a moment, her excited voice echoed up from the chamber. "He's right. There are Latin inscriptions carved directly into the stone. This might tell us exactly when the chamber was sealed and by whose order." The team worked methodically through the morning, carefully removing each item from the chamber and documenting its position and condition. The first chest to be opened contained what appeared to be religious artifacts, ornate silver chalices, jeweled crosses, and illuminated manuscripts that had clearly been created by monastery craftsmen. Thomas's theory about the chamber being connected to Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries was proving to be accurate. These were exactly the kind of valuable religious items that would have been seized from monasteries and brought to royal palaces for safekeeping. The second chest revealed something even more extraordinary. Inside, wrapped in silk that had somehow survived the centuries, were personal letters bearing the royal seal of Henry VIII. Dr. Ashford's hand shook slightly as she carefully unfolded the first letter, and began to read the Tudor English text. "This is a letter from Henry to Thomas Cromwell," she announced to the gathering crowd of specialists. "It's dated 1538, and it appears to be giving specific instructions about hiding certain artifacts from those who would use them against the crown." The letter provided the first concrete evidence of why the chamber had been created. Henry VIII, in the midst of his religious and political reforms, had ordered that certain sensitive items be hidden away at Hampton Court Palace. The location had been chosen because it was one of his favorite residences and was considered completely secure. As more letters were carefully unfolded and read, a picture emerged of a systematic effort to preserve and hide items that might have been politically or religiously controversial during the volatile Tudor period. There were references to artifacts from dissolved monasteries, portraits of religious figures who had fallen from favor, and documents that detailed the true extent of Henry's seizure of church property. Thomas found himself drawn into the historical detective work as much as the archaeological discovery. His knowledge of Tudor history, combined with his careful observation skills, made him valuable in interpreting what they were finding. "Look at this," Thomas said, examining one of the rolled documents that had just been carefully unrolled. "This appears to be an inventory list written in the same hand as some of the royal letters. It's cataloging exactly what was placed in this chamber and when." The inventory list was a goldmine of historical information. It detailed not just the contents of the chamber, but the reasons why each item had been hidden. Some artifacts were described as too valuable to risk, while others were noted as politically sensitive or requiring royal protection. As the day progressed and more items were carefully removed from the chamber, it became clear that Thomas's initial observation had led to one of the most significant Tudor archaeological discoveries ever made. The chamber contained not just valuable artifacts, but a detailed record of one of the most turbulent periods in English history. Dr. Hartwell pulled Thomas aside as the team prepared to continue their work into the evening. "Sergeant Whitmore, I hope you understand the historical significance of what you've discovered. This find will reshape our understanding of Henry VIII's reign and the religious reforms of the 1530s and 1540s. On the fourth day of the excavation, the team made a discovery that would prove to be the most significant find yet. Hidden beneath layers of protective cloth at the bottom of the largest chest, they found a collection of portraits that had been painted by court artists during Henry VIII's reign. These weren't just any portraits. They appeared to be paintings of individuals who had been erased from official court records. Thomas watched in fascination as Dr. Collins carefully lifted each portrait from the chest. The paintings had been remarkably well preserved by the dry, sealed environment of the chamber. The faces that stared out from the canvases were vivid and lifelike, painted with the skill that characterized the best Tudor court artists. "These are extraordinary," Dr. Ashford whispered as she examined the first portrait. "This appears to be Thomas More, but painted in a style that suggests it was done after his execution. Someone commissioned a memorial portrait and then had it hidden away." Thomas studied the painting over Dr. Ashford's shoulder. Sir Thomas More had been Henry VIII's Lord Chancellor until he opposed the king's break with Rome, leading to his execution in 1535. A portrait honoring his memory would have been extremely dangerous to possess during Henry's later years. The second portrait was even more shocking. It showed a young woman in royal dress, but her face had been deliberately damaged and then carefully repaired. Dr. Hartwell examined the restoration work with a magnifying glass. "Look at this," he said with excitement. The original face was scratched out, probably on royal orders, and then a different face was painted over it. But we can still see traces of the original underneath, using specialized photographic techniques. The team was able to reveal the original portrait beneath the overpainted surface. When the images were processed and enhanced, they showed the unmistakable features of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife who had been executed on charges of treason. Thomas felt a chill as he stared at the restored image. Someone saved a portrait of Anne Boleyn by painting over her face, then hid it away for centuries. They must have known that possessing her image could mean death. The discovery of the Anne Boleyn portrait sent waves of excitement through the international historical community. Here was a contemporary painting of one of history's most famous queens, hidden away and forgotten until Thomas's careful observation had led to its rediscovery. As the team continued examining the portraits, they found paintings of other controversial figures from Henry's court. There was a portrait of Cardinal Wolsey, Henry's advisor, who had fallen from grace. Another showed John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, who had been executed alongside Thomas More for opposing Henry's religious policies. This chamber wasn't just hiding valuable artifacts, Thomas realized as he studied the collection. Someone was preserving the memory of people who had been officially erased from history. Dr. Ashford nodded in agreement. Whoever sealed this chamber was taking an enormous risk. Possessing portraits of executed traitors would have been considered treason itself during Henry's reign. The carved Latin inscriptions on the chamber wall were finally translated by a specialist in Tudor Latin. The inscription revealed that the chamber had been sealed in 1540 by order of someone identified only as Custos Memoria, the keeper of memory. This mysterious figure had apparently taken it upon themselves to preserve artifacts and images that might otherwise have been destroyed. Thomas spent his off-duty hours researching court records from 1540, trying to identify who might have been responsible for creating the hidden chamber. His investigation led him to discover references to a court official named William Pemberton, who had served as keeper of the royal collections during Henry's reign. "I think I know who our custos memoria might have been," Thomas told Dr. Ashford the next morning. William Pemberton was responsible for managing Henry's art collection, and he would have had access to portraits and artifacts that were being removed from display. Dr. Ashford was intrigued by Thomas's research. Pemberton would have been in the perfect position to save controversial items by hiding them away, and Hampton Court was one of his regular postings. As the team prepared to remove the last items from the chamber, they made one final discovery that confirmed Thomas's theory. At the very bottom of the chamber, wrapped in oiled cloth, they found a personal journal written in English rather than Latin. The journal belonged to William Pemberton and detailed his efforts to preserve what he called the true record of our times. Pemberton's journal revealed that he had been horrified by Henry's systematic destruction of art and documents that contradicted the official version of events. Working in secret, he had saved the most significant items by hiding them in the specially constructed chamber beneath the clock court. The journal's final entry, dated December 1540, explained Pemberton's motivations. Future generations must know the truth of what transpired in these troubled times. These faces, these words, these treasures represent souls who lived and died in service to their beliefs. I commit them to the earth, trusting that someday someone will find them and remember. Thomas felt a deep connection to William Pemberton. As he read these words, both men had been guardians in their own way, Pemberton protecting historical truth, and Thomas protecting the palace that held these secrets. The guard's careful attention to his surroundings had finally allowed Pemberton's hidden treasure to see daylight again after more than 4 centuries. The discovery at Hampton Court Palace quickly became international news. Thomas found himself thrust into the spotlight as journalists and historians from around the world wanted to interview the royal guard, who had solved one of England's most significant archaeological mysteries. The portrait of Anne Boleyn alone was being hailed as one of the most important Tudor discoveries of the century. Within a week of the chamber being opened, Thomas was invited to give a presentation to the Royal Historical Society in London. Standing before an audience of distinguished historians and archaeologists, he felt nervous but proud as he described how his routine observation of settling cobblestones had led to such an extraordinary discovery. The key was paying attention to details that others might overlook, Thomas explained to the gathered experts. As a royal guard, I'm trained to notice when something is different or out of place. That morning, the cobblestones simply didn't look the same as they had the day before. Professor Diana Blackwood, the president of the Royal Historical Society, praised Thomas's contribution to historical scholarship. Sergeant Whitmore's careful observation and subsequent research have given us invaluable insights into one of the most turbulent periods of English history. The William Pemberton Chamber represents a time capsule that might never have been discovered without his vigilance. The artifacts from the chamber were carefully transported to specialized conservation laboratories where they would undergo months of detailed study and preservation work. The Anne Boleyn portrait was already being prepared for a special exhibition that would tour major museums around the world. Thomas was granted special leave from his guard duties to work with the archaeological team as they continued analyzing the find. His knowledge of palace history and his careful attention to detail made him invaluable in interpreting the significance of various artifacts and documents. During his research, Thomas made another significant connection. He discovered that William Pemberton had not worked alone in creating the hidden chamber. Court records from 1540 showed payments to stonemasons and carpenters for special work in the clock court, authorized by Pemberton's signature. Pemberton had helped Thomas explain to Dr. Ashford he couldn't have built and sealed that chamber by himself. There was a network of people who were committed to preserving these historical artifacts. This revelation led to a new investigation into other locations at Hampton Court where similar hidden chambers might exist. Using ground-penetrating radar, The team began surveying other areas of the palace where Pemberton might have created additional hiding places. Thomas's theory proved correct when radar scans revealed another void beneath the floor of the Chapel Royal. This second chamber was smaller than the first, but it contained additional religious artifacts and documents that had been saved from destruction during Henry's religious reforms. The discovery of multiple hidden chambers confirmed that there had been a systematic effort to preserve historical artifacts during the Tudor period. Thomas's initial observation had uncovered not just one chamber, but an entire network of secret repositories that had remained hidden for centuries. As news of the discovery spread, other historic sites across Britain began conducting their own searches for similar hidden chambers. Thomas was invited to consult on several of these investigations, his expertise in observation and historical analysis making him a valuable asset to archaeological teams. The British Museum announced plans for a major exhibition featuring the artifacts from Pemberton's chambers. The exhibition, titled Hidden Histories, The Secret Archive of Hampton Court, would showcase the portraits, documents, and religious artifacts that had been preserved by the mysterious keeper of memory. Thomas was invited to serve as a special consultant for the exhibition, helping to provide context for visitors about how the discovery had been made and why it was so significant. He worked closely with museum curators to create displays that would tell the story of both William Pemberton's courage in preserving these artifacts and the modern detective work that had led to their rediscovery. Dr. Ashford approached Thomas with an unexpected opportunity. The University of London has offered you a position as a research fellow in Tudor archaeology, she said. Your work on this discovery has impressed some very important people in the academic world. Thomas was honored by the offer, but he was also conflicted. He loved his work as a royal guard and felt a deep connection to Hampton Court Palace. After much consideration, he decided to accept a part-time research position that would allow him to continue his guard duties while pursuing his passion for historical investigation. The arrangement proved to be perfect for Thomas. His time protecting the palace as a royal guard and the other half uncovering its secrets as a researcher. His unique combination of security training and historical knowledge made him ideally suited for both roles. 6 months after the initial discovery, Thomas published his first academic paper about the William Pemberton chambers. The paper, co-authored with Dr. Ashford and Dr. Hartwell, was published in the Journal of Tudor Studies and received widespread acclaim from historians around the world. The paper established Thomas as a serious historical researcher while maintaining his primary identity as a dedicated royal guard. He had successfully bridged the gap between his military training and his academic interests, creating a unique career path that honored both his commitment to protecting Britain's heritage and his passion for understanding its history. 2 years after his initial discovery, Thomas stood once again in the clock court at Hampton Court Palace. But now his role had evolved far beyond that of a traditional royal guard. He had become the palace's first guard historian, a unique position, created specifically to recognize his contributions to understanding the site's hidden history. The clock court looked much the same as it had before the discovery, with one important difference. A small brass plaque now marked the location where William Pemberton's chamber had been found. The inscription read, "Here in 1540, William Pemberton, keeper of memory, preserved the true record of his times. Discovered October 2023 by Sergeant Thomas Whitmore, Royal Guard." Thomas felt a deep sense of satisfaction every time he read that plaque. His name would forever be associated with one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in British history. But more importantly, William Pemberton's courage in preserving historical truth had finally been recognized after nearly 5 centuries. The exhibition, Hidden Histories, The Secret Archive of Hampton Court, had been a phenomenal success, traveling to museums in New York, Paris, Tokyo, and Sydney. Millions of visitors had seen the Anne Boleyn portrait and learned the story of how a royal guard's careful observation had led to its rediscovery. Thomas had become something of a celebrity in the archaeological world, but he remained grounded in his primary mission of protecting and understanding Hampton Court Palace. His unique perspective as both guardian and scholar gave him insights that traditional academics sometimes missed. The palace had established a new program based on Thomas's discovery. The Guardian Observer Initiative trained security staff at historic sites across Britain to recognize potential archaeological opportunities. Thomas served as the program's director, teaching guards and security personnel how their everyday observations could contribute to historical scholarship. "You are the eyes and ears of these historic places," Thomas told a group of newly trained guards during one of his workshops. "You see these sites every day in all weather conditions and at all times. You notice things that visitors and even researchers might miss. Your observations are valuable contributions to our understanding of history." The program had already led to several new discoveries at other historic sites. A guard at Warwick Castle had noticed unusual echo patterns in a particular corridor, leading to the discovery of a hidden medieval chamber. Another guard at Edinburgh Castle had observed changes in stone coloration that revealed previously unknown structural modifications from the 16th century. Thomas's academic career had flourished alongside his guard duties. He had completed a master's degree in Tudor history through the University of London, writing his dissertation on William Pemberton and the network of court officials who had worked to preserve controversial historical artifacts during Henry VIII's reign. His research had revealed that Pemberton's efforts were part of a larger movement among court officials, were concerned about the destruction of historical records and artifacts during the religious upheaval of the 1530s and 1540s. Similar hidden chambers had been discovered at other royal palaces, suggesting a coordinated effort to preserve England's cultural heritage during a time of political turmoil. The Anne Boleyn portrait had undergone extensive restoration and analysis, revealing details about Tudor court painting techniques that had been previously unknown to art historians. The portrait had also provided new insights into Anne Boleyn's appearance and the way she was remembered by those who knew her. Personally, Thomas had been invited to speak at conferences and universities around the world, sharing the story of his discovery and its implications for understanding Tudor history. But he always returned to Hampton Court Palace, where he felt most at home among the ancient stones and centuries-old mysteries. On quiet mornings, when the palace was empty of tourists and the mist rose from the Thames, just as it had on that October day when he first noticed the settling cobblestones, Thomas would walk through the clock court and think about William Pemberton. He imagined the court official working by candlelight, carefully wrapping precious artifacts and portraits. Knowing that he might never live to see them discovered again, Thomas had recently made another significant discovery. While researching in the palace archives, he had found evidence that Pemberton had created a detailed map showing the locations of all his hidden chambers. The map had been coded and disguised as architectural drawings, but Thomas's knowledge of the palace layout and Pemberton's methods allowed him to decode it. The map suggested that there were at least 3 more hidden chambers somewhere within Hampton Court Palace. Thomas was planning a systematic survey of the areas indicated on Pemberton's coded map. Using the same careful observation skills that had led to his initial discovery, as Thomas prepared for another day of guard duty and historical research, he reflected on how his life had changed since that foggy October morning. He had always known that history lived within the walls of Hampton Court Palace, but he had never imagined that he would play such a significant role in uncovering its secrets. The brass plaque and the clock court bore witness to the power of careful observation and dedicated service. Thomas Whitmore, royal guard and historian, had proven that the most important discoveries sometimes come from the most unexpected sources. His vigilance in protecting the palace had led to new understanding of its past, ensuring that the stories hidden within its walls would be preserved for future generations. William Pemberton's mission to preserve the true record of our times had finally been fulfilled. Thanks to a modern guardian who understood that protecting history meant more than just standing watch, it meant truly seeing and understanding the treasures that surrounded him every day.